Hi, everybody, and thank you for being here. Tonight, we've got a very important talk about nutrition and mental health, and we're honored to have Dr. Brooke Resch with us and our two youth board members, Elise and Emily.
The information presented tonight is not meant to offer a diagnosis or treatment of any kind. This discussion is for informational purposes only. If you feel triggered, please reach out to a therapist, a counselor, or a trusted adult. If you are in a crisis, call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or Teen Line at 800-852-8336.
All right, we are really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say, and I'll see you at the end. Have a wonderful talk.
Okay, so we're here today to welcome Dr. Brooke on our Teen Talk. So, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm Dr. Brooke Resch. I go by Cook with Dr. Brooke on social media, and I'm a board certified psychiatrist. So I went to medical school. I did a psychiatry residency. I've been in school forever, out of school the last couple of years now, and practicing psychiatry, which is really, um, one of many important roles in mental health care. And I found my way into psychiatry during my training because I really like that we get longer appointment times with patients. We get to get more in the weeds with patients, really lived experiences. And I'm not, I don't look at labs or X-rays all that often. Sometimes it comes up, but not very often. And I prefer to treat the patients and not the numbers. So psychiatry has allowed me to do that. But we still don't get enough time with patients. I wish our appointments were even longer. I don't get a chance during most of my day job to talk with folks about nutrition as much as I would like. And so in recent years, that has kind of led to this passion project of speaking about nutritional psychiatry on social media and making videos and trying out recipes and trying to talk more to a broader audience about this kind of interesting topic, this emerging area of research that you may not always have time to get to at a psychiatry appointment. So that's kind of where I landed where I am. And we have not met before, so I was hoping to get to hear about kind of who I'm talking with today and hear from you two as well.
Yeah. I'll go first, I guess. My name's Emily. I have been a part of Teens for Teens Help for just over a year now. I am a senior in high school, so graduating soon. And yeah, I just ended up here because I initially joined a club at my school, focused on mental health, and I sort of wanted to expand further and to bring more resources in because I live in sort of a town where there's not a lot of mental health resources. And so bringing those that we have into our town is something that really intrigued me. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah, my name is Elise. I'm a junior at Bronx Science in New York, and I have been with Teens for Teens Help for also about a year now. And I originally joined because I'm passionate about mental health advocacy and awareness, but also my school is known for having a more toxic environment, and mental health is so incredibly important when you're a teen and you're going through so much change. And so I wanted to bring mental health awareness and advocacy to my school to help other students like me get through their teenage years.
Excellent. Well, I'm so excited that you guys wanted to chat with me as one of the conversations on this kind of platform. And I was really excited that you and some of your other board members prepared some very thoughtful, very interesting questions ahead
Mhm.
of time. So I'm looking forward to going through them together.
Yeah. So I guess if I'll start for our first question we had was how much of an impact does nutrition have on mental health? Do you have an example of someone whose mental health improved substantially or even a little bit by changing their nutrition?
Yeah, I think nutrition can have a big impact on people's mental health, but I also don't want to overpromise or give like false claims, right? I'm a physician first, not an influencer first. So I don't try to make sensationalist claims or, overrepresent the data. There is a lot of emerging research with how nutrition and our mental health are connected and that it can be a very powerful tool, but that data is not as strong as other evidence-based interventions, things like medications that have gone through clinical trials, psychotherapies that are very evidence-based. So it is emerging as a tool, as an important tool, but probably most likely in addition to all the other good stuff going on, getting good sleep. When we're talking about lifestyle interventions for mental health outcomes, exercise has a lot more evidence behind it than nutrition does. So nutrition is important, but I would never want to tell people that like if you eat enough carrots, that'll cure your anxiety. Or, if you stop eating Doritos, your depression would go away. That would be disingenuous and kind of overrepresenting what we know about nutritional psychiatry. So it is a great tool, but it's one of many tools, and it's usually not a standalone tool. And the part two of that about a patient who substantially changed their mental health through nutrition. I actually had a follow up with a patient earlier today who has benefited fairly significantly from seeing me in a psychiatry clinic for medication management. They've done therapy before. They have been getting those other evidence-based treatments, and only in the last few months that they have been really focusing on their nutrition and eating better and eating more in a more whole foods way, higher fiber, have they noticed a significant shift on top of what they were already getting. So for that individual earlier today, it kind of, I guess I would say, like tipped the scales for them. They were already improving and they were they were on the path to healing and recovery, but this seems to have kind of supercharged it a little bit. So this was a few hours ago I was talking with them. So that was really encouraging coming into this conversation today about what a good tool it can be.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, to move on to the next question, what do you think is the biggest myth about nutrition and mental health?
This is not, I don't think, a super widely adopted myth, but there are a few loud individuals that have been preaching about ketogenic diet, or carnivore diets and mental health. And that's another one where it's kind of to be determined. There might be a role for keto diets, or for people listening, keto diets are basically very low carb, where your brain and your body are running off of ketones in your body instead of off of carbs. So it's generally going to be your calories are primarily coming from fats and proteins instead of carbs. And then your body is running in a ketotic state. And there may be a role for ketosis and keto diets in mental health care, but that's another one that we don't have, I would say, sufficient evidence to widely recommend it at this point. Keto is a powerful tool in certain seizure conditions. It is sometimes really powerful in like PCOS or diabetes, but as like a broad recommendation for mental health care is probably too restrictive. There's probably too many good things that you have to cut out when you're on a keto diet. It might have a role, and the early research is in the fancy jargon word for it is SPMI, or severe and persistent mental illness. So maybe folks with schizophrenia, bipolar might have some utility with keto, but I would say that's a myth that is circulating and upsetting, that people are touting keto as this maybe magic cure-all. I would love for it to be a magic cure-all, but it's not there yet. And even the folks that it does benefit, it's probably gonna be a small subset of folks. So I do worry about keto being overly popularized because it comes with its own risks.
Okay, so I guess sort of going back off of that, one of our questions was, it feels like people add protein to everything and there's a lot of people pushing protein. So is protein really that important when it comes to nutrition and mental health, or are there other things like fiber that we can be prioritizing?
So the short answer is that they're both important. Protein is hugely important. Fiber is hugely important. We need lots of different variety in our diets, different macronutrients, micronutrients, to be supporting our brains and our bodies. But what you were getting at there wisely is that while both are both important, the majority of Americans are meeting their recommended protein amounts every day. The majority of Americans are not meeting their recommended fiber amounts every day. Now, there's millions and millions of Americans out there. So are there many people who could benefit from increasing their protein? Yes. If we're talking about public health messaging, or, speaking to a broad audience, then fiber is probably the one that people are missing out on more. So both are important, but most people, I think, overvalue how much protein they should be getting, or maybe undervalue how much they're already getting, and aren't thinking about some of those other tools. So we know the most evidence-based diet for positive mental health outcomes is the Mediterranean diet, which is actually a relatively high carb diet. It's got whole grains, it's got fruits and veg, it's got beans and legumes, and it does contain protein in different forms. So beans and legumes, seafood. I always say you can eat anything on a Mediterranean diet. There's no food you have to cut out. You can still have steak once in a while. You can still have processed foods in moderation. But if you look at, the Mediterranean diet pyramid, it is more carb based, healthy carbs. It includes protein, but if we're following those dietary recommendations and that research, then we probably don't need to put like protein in our orange juice, right? That might be a bit much.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
You guys have probably seen those at the grocery store.
Yeah, I was about to say, I've seen so many influencers pushing protein into everything. So I think it's really refreshing to hear how important diversity is in food.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next question. In what ways does our mood affect our eating habits and vice versa?
So that is a good question. There was actually a research study a few years back now at the University of Minnesota that looked at eating when we're under distress. So a lot of times when people are feeling upset or maybe stressed or anxious, we're reaching towards foods that are comfortable, familiar, tasty, and not always the healthiest. And we often do that with the impression that this slice of cake, these Doritos, that's going to make me feel better. In the study at the University of Minnesota, what they did is they purposely made a group of individuals upset. They showed them videos that were upsetting, sad puppies, war scenes, things that are emotionally distressing. And then they randomly gave people either their comfort food, the chocolate cake, a neutral food, carrots, or no food. And while we saw people's emotional distress decreased in the comfort food group, it also decreased in the other groups. So it's a small study, but there's been a few other kind of similar ones, self-report data that show that it's not so much the food that we're eating, but it's the passage of time. It's the distraction task. It's the I'm feeling strong emotions, I'm paying attention to them, and I'm going to do something about it. But that doing something about it could be having a different food, it could be going on a walk, it could be journaling, it could be listening to music. We're probably overvaluing how much that slice of chocolate cake has on our mood. And don't say that in a judgmental way. You're certainly allowed to have chocolate cake if you want it and if you enjoy it, but I wouldn't give the cake so much credit for making you feel better, right? You made you feel better by using a coping skill, and the cake was along for the ride.
Yeah, for sure. This next question sort of tapers off that. So, but are there any specific foods that can help reduce stress or anxiety? Or, like you just said, is it simply just the passage of time or doing a different action during those moments?
Right. In the moment, minute to minute feelings, there's probably not a huge role of food in those kind of minute to minute emotions. In my world, in psychiatry, we often talk about mood as being more of, big patterns. So people being depressed for weeks to months on end or having anxiety that's, at a baseline that's elevated. So that's really where nutrition can help play a role in improving that kind of baseline level of your mood or your distress. But in the moment, it's probably not super therapeutic. There's maybe some utility to things that are really, really sour or really spicy or otherwise kind of very sensory wise intense because it accomplishes more of what I was talking about before. It's a very strong distraction signal. It very quickly gets your brain to kind of stop thinking about whatever it was just ruminating on and switch it to, oh my gosh, my mouth hurts. So not that, but that's not so much a nutritional value of those foods as it is like the sensory experience. You could have something incredibly sour, like a lemon, that's very few calories, or you could have a, a a sour candy that's more calorically dense. So it's not so much about the nutrition components that might be helpful. Nutrition wise, we can adjust that baseline, but in the moment, there's not really like, oh, I have to have iron because I feel distressed. It's like maybe something that is a very intense experience can help kind of distract my brain and my body from what I'm spiraling about, but not so much, but not the nutrition piece is not what's going to really move the needle in that moment.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Like I never would have really like even considered having like a different sensory experience would have sort of moved my mind away from that's really interesting. And I think like that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people can take away from that, like a coping method when you're stressed is to
Right.
have sour candy or whatever. So that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next question. Um, does caffeine make anxiety worse?
For many, yes. So caffeine is a stimulant. And like I often say with my patients, stimulants are stimulating. So that's whether or not you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, anxious, unanxious, stimulants are stimulating. They do make your heart beat faster. They do make your body kind of enter more of a fight or flight state, which is great for alertness. It's great for energy. But they are stimulating. And so some people don't tolerate caffeine and notice that it does significantly impact their anxiety. And I think if we're getting back to kind of myth busting, I think that's another myth floating around that, oh, if caffeine calms me down, then that means I have this diagnosis. Or if I can't tolerate caffeine, then that means I have a panic disorder. It's very variable. There's people with lots of different conditions in the world, and they all respond differently to different interventions. I wish it was more simple. Like if I had a crystal ball, my job would be much, much easier. But caffeine is a psychoactive substance. It will stimulate your brain and your body, and that may be helpful in many ways. But it could have its own but it could have its own downsides, including anxiety, or the big thing that makes me, I preach about more is sleep. Caffeine has a much longer half-life than people think. So even when you're not feeling it anymore, even when you're like, oh, I'm ready to go to bed, and you close your eyes and you fall asleep, if there's still caffeine in your system, even if the psychoactive component isn't there, if it's still on board, that will affect your sleep architecture. So if we put stickers on your scalp while you're sleeping, after you just had a bunch of coffee or after you had like an energy drink, the brain waves that we measure will look different than if there was no caffeine in your system. So even if you feel tired, I usually recommend folks not drink coffee within 8 hours of bed. And for me, the easy cutoff is like noon, just because it's easy to keep track of. So I personally try not to have coffee after noon. I had to do a lot of unlearning of that myself. I drank a lot of coffee in med school. I had a lot of long days and long nights. And my sleep was horrible. I was sleeping great because I had so much sleep debt as a medical student. I would fall asleep right away, but it wasn't good quality sleep. And if we're not getting good quality sleep in the long run, that's going to be worse for your anxiety as well. So that's one, yes, short term can make you feel more anxious, and long term is going to be not as good for your brain and body.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Oh,
No, go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know as a student, we drink a lot of caffeine, whether through coffee or through energy drinks. And I know a lot of my friends like to tell me, oh, I'm not drinking it, a few hours before bed, so it's fine. But I definitely know now that it still plays a role in the quality of sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, noon is pretty conservative, and I think it has about a 5 to 8 hour half-life. So, if you wanted to say 2 or 3 o'clock, then again, that's the half-life. So half of it is still in your system 5 to 8 hours later. So it is a pretty long half-life. And it is somewhat customizable to people, but it's really worth experimenting with, because if it is disrupting your sleep, you might not know it, right? If you're like, I slept 8 hours, my eyes were closed the whole time. But if it's not good quality sleep, you're going to wake up feeling bad and you're going to drink more coffee. And it's really tough to disrupt that cycle. So it's a very worthy experiment. If you feel like you can never get enough coffee in your day, you might already be overshooting it. So trying like a noon cutoff or something a little more strict could really help with that quality sleep at night.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I just recently had to cut out caffeine completely, like cold turkey, because of
Very
some stomach
wise.
issues. And
Mhm.
I noticed, like, I get so much better at sleep at night, and I didn't really think I was drinking that much caffeine because I look at my high school counterparts and they're like chugging energy drinks. And then I stopped and I was like, oh my goodness, this sleep is so much better, even though
Mhm.
I really wasn't drinking it that late in the day, I thought. So, yeah, that's really interesting, especially how long that half life is. That's crazy.
Mhm.
Okay, our next question is, and you sort of answered this earlier as well, but what are some of your opinions on using food as a coping mechanism or as a reward system?
Yeah, like we kind of covered, I think it is one of many coping mechanisms, and I don't want to judge or shame people for using it as a coping mechanism, but there are certainly other healthier coping mechanisms. And because I try to be very, I would say, morally neutral about food, I talk about nutrition all the time, but I don't think there's good foods and bad foods. It's just all foods have strengths and weaknesses. But when we use it as a reward, we are really moralizing it. And I think that can be a little bit of a dangerous cycle uh, where we're not looking at food as something I can enjoy, something that fuels my body, something that I can share with at lunch with a friend. And now all of a sudden it's on this pedestal. So I would try to avoid using it as like a reward. If you want to get, ice cream after the big game, that's a fine reward, but the reward should really be spending time with the team and bonding. Don't It shouldn't be the ice cream, or as we would enjoy from in Wisconsin, the Culvers. They have Culvers everywhere now, but at the time that was like, very regionally specific
The thing,
treat.
yes.
What is Culver?
Oh,
Okay, so it's not everywhere yet. It's a fast food chain, but I always say it's between fast food and like a diner.
yeah,
And their thing is they have frozen custard instead of ice cream, so it's a little bit richer. And not that I moralize food, but frozen custard is great.
it's delicious. And they have a
Mhm.
flavor of the day. So,
I might have to go to Wisconsin. What? That's crazy.
It's
New
it's
York.
much more spread out now than it used to be. I mean, I'm in
yeah.
Minnesota. We have them here. My parents live in Florida. They have them there. They're expanding, so you might not have to go all the way to Wisconsin, but
Yeah.
that's where it started.
Yeah, New York seems like it's missing out.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so for the next question, if you had one don't do to share with teens regarding nutrition and their well-being, what would it be?
Um, I would suggest not making a million changes at once. A lot of people, when they start to get motivated about lifestyle interventions, about I'm going to eat healthier, I'm going to take care of my brain. I've been following this new gal on social media and she's motivating me. Don't change everything overnight because that's not super sustainable. And so if let's say you started following me and now you want to eat more vegetables, it's not, oh, I'm going to put vegetables in my smoothies. I'm going to have a salad for lunch and I'm going to make, this elaborate dinner. It's, what's one vegetable that I might want to have as a snack and how can I do that twice a week? And then, making those incremental changes because if you overhaul everything all at once, the likelihood that that behavior change sticks is much lower. So I think I would say that is even if you feel like you have the worst diet ever, we're not like cutting out coffee and cutting out Doritos and making and cooking from scratch. We're going to do one thing at a time. And maybe that's I'm going to pack my lunch twice a week now, or maybe that's I'm going to cut off my coffee at 3 p.m. instead of at 6 p.m. and then see if or how that behavior change can snowball into other behavior changes.
Okay. Our next question is, how does the timing of meals impact mental health? Does skipping meals, especially breakfast, affect a teen's mental health and focus?
So skipping meals is probably not typically wise. We mostly want to be getting 3 square meals a day in, plus or minus snacks, because there's a lot of different nutrients that our brains and bodies need to be running their best.
So moving on to the next question, what are some examples of affordable, easy snacks or meals that can support brain health for teens, and is there one that stands out?
I'm a huge fan of, and it's not the most glamorous snack or meal in the world, but oatmeal. Oatmeal is incredibly cheap. It's a whole grain, and it's something that we want to generally be minimizing processed foods in our diet, but there's room for everything, right? And something like an instant oatmeal packet is probably, if you're buying it at the grocery store, like 25 cents a packet when you get them in those cases. And you can have that in your backpack, you can have that in your purse, you can have that when you're traveling. Most of the time, you can get a cup of hot water for free, and there you have like a quick snack or a quick, something to hold you over that's got whole grains that some you could chop up a little apple in there. When I'm at the airport, I always keep like some instant oatmeal with me because I don't want to starve when I don't want to pay airport prices. So it's very portable. It's very convenient. We know that the beta glucan, which is kind of like a special fiber in the oatmeal, is going to be good for our brain health. And I went to medical school. I care about brains, but I care about the rest of you too. Oats are incredibly beneficial for cardiovascular health as well. And so it's kind of a win-win. And they're very cheap. You can eat them about 1 million different ways. And they seem to have some head to toe benefits. So I'm a proponent of oatmeal. But in a close second, I would say popcorn. Popcorn also technically a whole grain and also quite cheap. And there's different ways to dress that up and change and tweak it. But popcorn is probably underrated as an easy, convenient, balanced snack.
Okay. Our next one is, how do you tackle nutrition if someone has an eating disorder like ARFID or other sensory issues with food?
Yeah, so with ARFID, and that's avoidant restricted food intolerance disorder, I believe. We have acronyms for everything, and then even I lose track. But essentially, ARFID is a pathological amount of aversion to different types of foods. So people really have a short list of foods that are safe to them, that are comfortable with them, that they're able to tolerate and eat comfortably, without being force fed. And with any kind of, it's very akin to specific phobias, like people being afraid of heights or spiders. With any of these kind of really avoidant, anxious conditions, we're going to talk about exposure therapy. And so I tell my patients, I'm not telling you just to white knuckle it and suck it up, right? That's a little bit blunt, but how can we do a graded exposure? So in, let's say, spider world where people are afraid of spiders, first we're sitting in a room and we're just talking about spiders. And then maybe after a while, we're holding a picture of a spider. And then maybe we have a stuffed animal of a spider. And then we bring in the tarantula, right? We're doing these exposures in a graded way where if we start with the tarantula, it's going to go terribly. People are going to freak out and they're never going to leave the room. But if we also just stick to talk about the spider and we never graduate to the next step, then we make no progress. So similarly with ARFID, and I'm not trying to be like blunt or mean, but part of it is kind of just doing the thing and putting yourself through the paces of exposing yourself to the thing that makes you uncomfortable. And maybe that's blending a food that you're afraid of in with a food that's safe. Maybe that's dyeing a food that's safe, a color that you normally wouldn't eat. Oh, if you don't like green vegetables, maybe you're having mashed potatoes, but they're dyed green. So it starts to get you acclimated to having a green vegetable, right? So with ARFID, we want to be gentle but firm about how we are incorporating foods into our diets.
For the next question, how do you believe a teen or parent can notice the threshold of wanting to be healthy versus disordered eating?
I mean, that's kind of $1 million question, right? When does it go from being a positive behavior to a dangerous behavior? And it's not always black and white, even as, professionals that see folks struggling with these things all the time. We sometimes have a hard time making that call too. And a phrase that I go back to a lot in my practice and a lot with my patients is, it's not a problem unless it's a problem, right? Because we want to identify when somebody is struggling, but we also don't want to over pathologize or over label people or point and say this is an issue when maybe it's not. And that's always a fine line to walk. So I try to go back to this mantra of it's not a problem unless it's a problem. Are we trying to add more vegetables in our diet because we want to try new foods and be eating healthier? And or are we, I can't go to that restaurant with my friends because they don't have the foods that I need. Now, outside of course, certain conditions like food allergies and things, but are you in charge of the behavior or is the behavior in charge of you? Am I implementing this behavior change in a way that is improving my life, or is the behavior change are my thoughts and feelings around eating something that is detracting from my life, from my relationships, from my grades, from my extracurriculars, right? So it can be sometimes very tough to tell, but the phrase that I go back to is it's not a problem unless it's a problem. And if you're worried that it might be a problem, then the first thing to do is to bring it up with that person. I'm worried this might be a problem. Now, if it's not a problem, they will probably say, "Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I get why you would be worried." If they're very defensive, then you're probably onto something. Why would you ever be upset with me? I'm just trying to eat healthier. I'm just trying to get muscles. I'm just trying to, you know, be my best self and you're trying to tear me down. If somebody lashes out at a gentle suggestion or a gentle curiosity that their thoughts and behaviors around food are less helpful or more harmful, if you're getting that lashback, that's also pretty, I think, telling. Hopefully telling for you and for the person that's feeling very defensive.
Yeah, for sure. What do you believe when it comes to a recovering teen who has an eating disorder and wants to diet safely again?
I would say there's no like magic number or threshold of, okay, I've recovered from my eating disorder and it's been this long, and so therefore I can diet safely again. But if we are talking about teens, I'm making some assumptions here, then the disordered eating inherently can't be in that remote of the past, right? I mean, unless we're talking about a child with disordered eating, a 17-year-old, and a 17-year-old that maybe wants to be working on their diet. I mean, if somebody was 14 and now they're 17, I would say that's just kind of too soon. These things are not on-off switches. So teenagers, I don't think should be necessarily focused on dieting, especially if they're recovered from an eating disorder. And there's not a magic finish line that you cross where now you graduated and you get to go back to dieting again. But if there were, I don't think it would be still in adolescence.
Okay. And for the next question, how are teens able to eat healthily without tracking macro intakes, while avoiding doing it in an unhealthy way?
That is an excellent question as well. And I think we do have a culture where we like to track things. We like to see how many steps we're getting and how many hours we're sleeping. And a lot of times, tracking things can be a very good motivator and a form of positive reinforcement. But that's another one of those things where it's not a problem unless it's a problem. And I would probably encourage people, if they're tracking something, to be tracking something that's not as numeric, right? So maybe tracking the number of colors that you eat in a day, or tracking, this is a number, but the servings of vegetables that you get in a day, not tracking exactly how many grams of fat and protein and carbs or how many milligrams of sodium unless you have specific guidance from your doctor, but tracking something else that can align with your health goals but doesn't feel so strict and restrictive. I'm tracking my water. I'm tracking once a week. I want to try a new recipe. That's one thing I can track, but it's not bleeding into every snack and every meal and every food decision that I make. So if you want to track and if that helps motivate you to be living a healthy life, try choosing something, or choosing goals, or choosing um, categories that are going to be more motivational and not so like self-deprecating, or more not something that you're going to get too obsessed with or granular about.
Yeah, because I feel like I've seen people and like tracking everything in like a snack and your meal, and I feel like what you exactly just said, like I feel like it can very easily slip into something that's more self-deprecating. It's tracking almost to like put you down if you don't get this and this macros. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, what tips do you have for how to avoid comparing what you eat with what other people are eating? So like, oh, sorry. So
Yeah,
like saying like, if I have more food on my plate than someone else at lunch or something like that.
I guess I would say I wish I had better tips, but it is very hard. And also, I think it's hard as a teen because a lot of your life is about comparison, right? You're comparing grades, you're comparing athletic performance, you're comparing. I mean, when I was in band and we would do like solo and ensemble, like a lot of things are competitive and a lot of things are measured. And so it's a tough spot to be in. And I was in many ways lucky, but in this way unlucky. I grew up with a twin sister, so there was even more comparison all the time about, every little thing. It's it's hard, and I guess that's the first step, is knowing that it's hard. And the other big step is like knowing when it's happening. Oh, I'm comparing my lunch to Elise's today. Why am I doing that? It's not just your brain and your thoughts will wander, and it's kind of natural that they might wander to comparative thoughts, but identifying that and knowing that it's an unhelpful thought. Oh, I had that thought, is probably not going to get me anywhere. That can be helpful. Also, when you see somebody eating at lunch, that's like seeing somebody on social media to an extent. This is a snapshot of their day, of their life, and so it's not necessarily representative of everything. So while I wish I had some better advice, the main advice is that it's very hard, and sometimes knowing that in and of itself can help make it less hard.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the next question is, how can teens focus on nutrition for mental well-being without getting caught up in diet culture?
Yeah, I think this was kind of similar to the tracking question, which is focus on what you can add, not what you want to restrict. So, what foods do I think are important for my brain and my body? What foods would I like to be eating more of? What foods might be good for me? And adding those in, they'll naturally supplant the other foods. And I think diet culture does often get very quantitative. It likes to measure things, it likes to track things. So, can I be making positive behavior changes in a way that I'm not getting as obsessed with the numbers about? So choosing goals like we talked about that are more fun, adding in a color, or saying I'm going to try a new recipe once a week, or I'm going to keep track of how many fruits and veggies I eat, and that's the competition, right? Not how much weight can I lose, or how much protein can I get in.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. So, how should we respond to our friends if they make toxic or inaccurate comments about food?
how should we respond to our friends if they make toxic or inaccurate comments about food? I often remind myself of what is called Harlan's razor. Razor is kind of a word for mantra or saying. Some person named Harlan at one point said, "Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity." And that sounds kind of mean, but it basically means most of the time people are not trying to be mean to us. Most people are not trying to cause us harm. If somebody says something toxic or unhelpful or critical, it's probably because they don't know any better and not because they're trying to yuck your yum. And so having grace with people, having patience with people, trying to assume other people's perspectives. Oh, I wonder why Emily said that at lunch today. I wonder what Brooke was thinking when she commented on my pizza versus making an assumption. Oh, Brooke must think that I am fat, or Emily must, you know, really hate herself if she eats that way. We want to make assumptions about people, but if we're going to make one assumption, we should assume that people are making bad choices out of not knowing better and not because they intend to do us harm. So most of the time we don't want to make assumptions, but if we are going to assume anything, I like to assume that people are really trying their best and doing their best. And when we know better, we do better.
Yeah. I really like that too because I feel like sometimes if you're looking at your friend who you think is saying something negative about food or saying anything really, and you sort of assume that they're saying it out of like almost out of malice, then like having that perspective I think is really interesting because it's like they just might not know better. So I really like that.
And that doesn't mean the thing they said isn't mean or hurtful or
Yeah.
toxic. That doesn't negate the words and actions. But I think if we try to be more empathetic towards people or try to assume the best out of people, then hurtful, toxic things are a little less hurtful and toxic.
For sure. Okay, our last formal question. What role do you think food influencers play on food trends, and how do we know if they are trustworthy influencers?
The short answer is you don't know if they're trustworthy influencers, right? And this is as a food influencer who I consider myself relatively trustworthy, and I have credentials, right? I have an MD, I have public health certificates, nutritional psychiatry certificates, but I also could be lying. You know, I could be making all of that up, and so you really have to take everything with a grain of salt. I think in general, you want to be following creators or taking advice from creators that do list some credentials. If they say that they're an RD or registered dietitian, if they're an MD or a DO, even if they're an RN, or in my, my social media feed is full of a lot of therapists. So a PsyD, a PhD, an LSW or LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. And again, people can be lying about those things, but also if it's actually a boarded specialty, usually you can look up their license number, or you can, if they're saying something harmful and toxic, you can report them to their board. And so when people do disclose their credentials online, I do think that does add some layer of credibility, although that's not foolproof. I think influencers are so named because they do have a huge influence on how we eat and what we eat. That's probably a big reason why protein is trending. That's probably a big reason why people are eating a bunch of sardines right now, which, by the way, is a great food trend. And so they can use their powers for good, or they could use their powers for evil. Again, I won't assume malice when stupidity would explain it better, but I try to be mindful in my posts that I'm sticking to the evidence, that I'm not sensationalizing things, even though that gets more clicks on the internet. When, hey, this is a superfood, or this food is causing belly button cancer, right? If I were to say loud, shocking things, that would probably get me more followers, but it wouldn't necessarily be true. So if somebody is being nuanced or subtle, that probably means that they're heartfelt because they're doing it for the information and not for the clout. And then another personal rule I follow of mine, and people don't have to follow this, but I don't post any like what I eat in a day videos. So I post a lot of recipes. I'll show pictures of my lunch, but I don't do the format that's often popular of like, this is what I eat in a day as a high school junior, or this is what I eat in a day as a competitive swimmer. I don't post those because I don't want to give the implication that people should be copying me. And I like to watch them from other people. I think they're entertaining and sometimes very inspiring, but they should be more entertainment, inspiration, not a playbook. And I worry that because I do list my credentials, and I do not to sound egotistical, but I have a relatively slim body type, and many people might consider that to be a desirable body type. That, oh, this trim physician had this for lunch, and then she had this for a snack, and she drank this many ounces of water, and that's what I should do. So I'm really not trying to be prescriptive with my videos. Um, if I'm showing a recipe, I'm not usually saying, how much of this am I eating? Or if I'm posting a picture of my lunch, I'm not saying, I have this for lunch every Monday, or, never. I try to not get too in the weeds on like the details and the numbers, because I don't want people to think that this is the action plan for them or the meal plan for them. And so I guess those would be some thoughts as you're trying to be a critical viewer on social media. Is there are many people making good content that aren't MDs or RNs, but in general, those are going to be, I think, more helpful accounts to follow, even if we're more boring and we're not so flashy. And then I personally don't post what I eat in the days. I think people can, but if you're watching those, also take from them what you're meant to take from them, and don't try to like emulate or copy anybody.
Yeah, I think social media, there's so much good to it, but there's also so much bad. Like the advocacy and the educational content can be so incredible and can reach a great range of people. But also when you post something, the influence it can have on an individual, it can really be immense. And so it's always a kind of difficult topic when
Mhm.
it comes to social.
So, after all the things we've talked about, we were just wondering, as a sort of summary, is what is the biggest takeaway you think for the relationship between nutrition and mental health?
Yeah, great question. I mean, nutrition is huge in so many ways. It can really move the needle for people's mental health, because on a nuts and bolts level, we need to be getting in the fuel that our brain and body needs to be performing its best. But even outside of that, we know that not just what we're eating, but how we're eating. Are we being social are we having dinner with our family or having lunch with our friends? Are we spending time in the kitchen preparing a meal, being creative? So it's both using nutrition as a vehicle to fuel our brains and our bodies appropriately, and also using eating as a tool for behavior change, for for other positive behavior changes in our day. So I think it's kind of multi-pronged in that way, because it's both it's kind of a prescription, right? Okay, I'm going to up my fiber and my omega 3s, and it's therapy, right? I'm having behavioral activation, I'm having more socialization, I'm having mindfulness. It can really accomplish a lot of things with one intervention.
For sure, thank you.
So, Dr. Brooke, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, it's always better if it rhymes. So people can find me at Cook with Dr. Brooke on most social media platforms. It's easy to remember. It's Doctor with a DR. So I have videos on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I have just recently started a Facebook and a Substack. So if anybody is on those platforms, you can be one of my first followers. But if I have long videos, recipes, study reviews, we get more into the weeds on my social media accounts.
Wow, that was really interesting information, very powerful. Thank you so much for doing it. Good questions. And Dr. Brooke, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us. We really appreciate it. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
thanks for having me.
Bye.